Hi everybody, it's Miss Villegas, just going through the notes real fast for some people who have been out with the stomach flu. So this is what we started off with today, and if you want to pause me and actually answer this yourself, because I'm going to reveal the answer in 3, 2, 1. The correct answer is choice number 2. For everybody else, just remember that you should be reading chapter 34, and some of the information is in chapter 29. Which we've read already, so some of this might sound familiar to you. We're going to look at a map quiz for next week, so make sure that you're looking at the map that we gave you the other day. So from what you see here and from our last do now, we know that the nationalists known as the Guomindang, the GMD, were participating in a civil war in conflict within China against the Communist Party that was being led by Mao. But how did we get here? So, of course, here's the title of this new chapter we're going into. But first, we got to take a peek at what's going on in China in the 1800s. Now, when we talk about the age of imperialism, we know that many of the Western European countries were going out and trying to gain valuable resources and wealth from other parts of the world, beyond the Americas. So where do they go to next? They go to places in Africa, India, and China. So as they're carving up China, they became spheres of influence. Now, after World War I, we see some countries pulling out their sphere of influence in China and some losing their access to China. One such country that lost their sphere of influence in China was Germany, as they had been blamed for World War I. Now, China's like, yay, we're going to get our land back. But then at the Paris Peace Conference, the European powers decided, you know what? We're going to give some of Germany's pieces to Japan. So that would explain some of the Japanese-held land in China. And this sets off an argument within China that goes beyond the Boxer Rebellion of anti-foreign rule. So, just quickly, I'm going to pause this for a moment. So, during the 1800s, we have the dynastic rule of the Qing in power, the Qing Manchu dynasty, and Empress Cixi had a nephew who she instated power to, who is known as Puyi. As you notice, Puyi is not yet an adult. He is 2 years old. And despite his age, he becomes the emperor of the Qing dynasty, and he's also known as the last emperor of China. Now, I'd go more into detail with this, but I'm just trying to get through this quickly for those people at home. So now this is Sun Yat-sen, and Sun Yat-sen was a nationalist in China. He promoted social welfare with his 3 principles that he came out with that were, it was democracy, social welfare, and nationalism. And he was trying to create a better China. And a quote from him said, we have the most people and we have the oldest culture, but yet we're the weakest country in the world. And so he was trying to change that. Hulk Hogan here. Now, the reason I put Hulk Hogan in here is to remind myself that Sun Yat-sen was an educated man. He wanted what was best for China, and although he was claimed as this president for China in this new era of overthrowing the Qing dynasty, he gave that up for the idea that this guy Yuan Shikai, who was a military general, that would create some sort of a strict and orderly dynasty. What Sun Yat-sen doesn't know is that Yuan Shikai has other intentions. He plans on just, yes, overthrowing the Qing dynasty, but then just setting up a new one. And Sun Yat-sen wanted something better for China, more modern, more Western. And so when Yuan Shikai did this, Sun Yat-sen was very upset. And it didn't work out for Yuan Shikai anyway. So that was good for Sun Yat-sen. But there was still contention between people in China whether they would flock to Sun Yat-sen's call or to a growing power and thought of communism. Now, after World War I, Japan gains land in China, and this sets off something called the May 4th movement. I'm just going to fast forward all this stuff because we're going to get to it anyway. So here's the May 4th movement, and with the May 4th movement, that Sun Yat-sen became a part of. It was many people, many students, many even women came out, and they were like, we're done with arranged marriages, and we want the foreigners out, and we want to go through a change. We want to learn from the West and build ourselves up, much like how the Meiji Restoration had happened in Japan. And if you can recall, that was when Japan was going through their modernization period, and they were able to recover from all those periods of isolation. Okay, so they have their May 4th movement, but there still will exist the civil war within China. And if you can relate it to Europe in the 1920s, 1930s, we're going to see there's a Great Depression. Worldwide, people are debating the effectiveness of democracy and capitalism, and people are starting to study other thoughts. And communism, especially for China, because they are the neighbor of Russia, they definitely start to take a peek at communism. So the GMD, with the leader of Chiang Kai-shek here, I learned him as Chiang Kai-shek, because Sun Yat-sen died. So Chiang Kai-shek, leader of the GMD, is now going against the communists, and they're fighting, and the civil war lasts for many years. Now, the one thing that actually does bring these two warring groups together is the fact that the Japanese are going to come in. But before I get to that, Chiang Kai-shek doesn't want the communists, so he starts to jail and kill anyone who is a communist or a friend of a communist, any communist sympathizers out there. So in efforts to avoid death and Chiang Kai-shek, many communists started to migrate and leave. And most of them were men, and Mao would lead this march, and it was thousands and thousands of miles. If you think about it, from New York to California is 3,000, a little bit more than 3,000 miles. So 6,000 miles is a lot. And this 100,000 group of men that had left, they end up very small numbers compared to what they had started with. And this was all in efforts to avoid this GMD, and Chiang Kai-shek. Now, Mao's communism was different from other earlier communist thoughts. He actually believed that you should seek the support not among the working class, but among the large peasant masses. So for China, communism was different in its origin, with seeking out peasants. And along this long march is where he gained much popularity. And the reason why is because although the GMD referred to the people on the Long March as these red bandits, Mao had specific rules along this march. Don't take a single thing from the people. Turn everything over that you've captured, and they wanted to treat the peasants nicely. They wanted to pay for the goods that they wanted. They didn't want to damage the crops. So the behavior of the forces of Mao along this long march were honorable. And then when they died, they were seen as victims of this terrible GMD that Chiang Kai-shek was in charge of. So in the end, actually, this ended up being a very good thing for Mao, although many people did die. And from Mao's words, a single spark can start a prairie fire. You could see here how that does remain true. So we already briefly talked about this, so I'm not going to spend much time on it, but it's important to understand how this plays a part in the rise of communism in China. So as the Long March had happened, and there was a divisive force occurring between the communists and the nationalists of the GMD, there was a common enemy with the two of them, and that common enemy was Japan. So as Japan is embarking upon its imperialism into China, the communists note they have to possibly team up with the GMD. And Chiang Kai-shek just doesn't want to do it. And believe it or not, even in the face of Japanese aggression, Chiang remained opposed to forming this united front with the communists. But And he even says the Japanese are a disease of the skin, which is something you could rid of. However, the communists are a disease of the heart, which would make it even tougher. So he really, really doesn't want to do this. But eventually his generals actually grab him, capture him, and hold him almost like a hostage situation until he actually agrees to ally with the communists. And he does, and they try to work together to expel the Japanese from China. And in the end, after World War II comes along, the Japanese are expelled from China, and in the end, the communists will win the war within China, and Mao Zedong will set up his own People's Republic of China, or the PRC. Now, what's funny is that, you know, sometimes communists will use words of democracy or of representation to make it seem as though they're there for the people, when in fact it's much of a totalitarian one. So here we have Mao that's instilling communism, yet he's calling it a republic, and, you know, one in which people vote for representation. Now, Mao, outside of the fact that he gained support of the peasants, he also gained support of women, and he tells them, you know, women hold up half the sky. So he empowers them with this feeling that they have a purpose. And he's very successful in convincing the women to join his cause. So with all these promises of reform, not just for women, but for, you know, the peasants, it is understandable that the communists were able to defeat the GMD's forces in battle and in spirit. So Mao goes on to restructure the government, and it looks very similar to what Stalin had done. So if you recall Stalin's 5-year plan, this was an effort to double industry, double agriculture, but even though Stalin was successful in doubling the numbers, he had forced labor and millions were killed, which is what's going to happen in China. Within 3 years, 30 million people die in China, whether it's starvation or execution because they were speaking out against the government. You know, still the people die. So, and what's funny is Mao actually does set up this campaign that he called, you know, he said, let 100 flowers bloom, let 100 thoughts, let them spread. And he was trying to say, hey, talk freely. But like any other totalitarian, once people did speak up in the thousands, he began, you know, executing them, rejecting them, jailing them. So in the end, he wasn't all about that. But with this great leap forward, he used similar ideas that Stalin had to form these collectives. And just like Stalin, you have these people dying of starvation, and then of course you have these low quality goods. Another program or policy that he initiates or launches is the Cultural Revolution. Now, the point of this is to get rid of anybody that would speak out or would revolt against him, and that would be the group that are known as the bourgeoisie. And these were the middle-class people, these were the educated ones, business owners, lawyers, doctors, teachers. And so he tells the easily influenced youth to experience the revolution firsthand. Go against your teachers, go against figures of authority, go against people who may try to organize your life for you. And in this way, he's getting rid of the bourgeoisie. Now, with these soldiers that he accrues from this Cultural Revolution, he creates a blindly loyal following, and he also kills off people who would disrespect and go against his authority. And because of this, schools closed, factories closed, the economy slowed down, civil war was threatening, and then finally Mao brings in this army to restore the order and to keep down the these red guards that he had started here. These kids that became part of his Cultural Revolution became known as the Lost Generation, undereducated, cut off from normal family life and careers, disillusioned with communism. And that's it.